In Section 10, we're going to move on to the topic of the ocean forwarder and NVOCC service offering, the specific things that OTIs, ocean forwarders and/or NVOCCs, do. Ocean forwarders and NVOCCs, as we've said at least a dozen times now, ocean transportation intermediaries, provide a number of services to U.S. importers. This doesn't mean that all forwarders and NVOCCs provide these services. It means they exist out in the possible realm of services to offer to a U.S. importer. Number one, negotiate container contract rates with steamship lines as an NVOCC only. Remember, that's the difference between an ocean forwarder and an NVOCC. The NVO being able to negotiate contract rates with steamship lines. Second, part and parcel of that conversation, the NVO is going to turn around and sell that contracted space to beneficial cargo owners. Importers, as we'll see over and over again, sometimes deal with steamship lines directly. Sometimes they deal with NVOs for their contractual needs. It's really a matter of strategy. We'll get into that later, too. Of course, as an ocean freight forwarder, you don't have to be an NVOCC to book space on a vessel. Or, for that matter, engage in what is referred to as spotting containers for loading at origin. That's simply a scenario where an overseas supplier will call a local freight forwarder and say, hey, I need 5 containers on Tuesday. The forwarder turns around, coordinates with the steamship lines to have those containers spotted at the factory when they're needed for loading. Freight forwarders do that all the time. Continuing on, a little bit more complex and sophisticated level of service offering is PO management, or purchase order coordination at origin with vendors. The U.S. importer places purchase orders on overseas suppliers. The importer doesn't necessarily have an office in Asia, in Europe, in anywhere to do direct follow-up with these vendors. Freight forwarders and NVOs, now referred to as 3PLs, third-party logistics companies, will provide that service on behalf of the U.S. importer in the country of origin, in China, in Taiwan, in Brazil, wherever. Following up with vendors, hey, is this purchase order ready? We're going to talk more about this in the next module on U.S. import models. We'll do that in greater detail. Let's settle with what we have for right now as purchase order management. Forwarders will also receive cargo from multiple vendors at origin container freight stations, a CFS. We have a supply chain perspective to describe that in just one second. In essence, a CFS is a warehouse at origin outside the port of Ningbo, for example, in China, where vendors send less than container load cargo to be consolidated. Third sub-bullet, another service that is actually part and parcel of PO management when purchase orders become actual goods that need to be shipped. Multi-vendor container loading services, that buyer's consolidation that we've talked about numerous times now, where freight is received into a CFS but loaded into a single container pursuant to the instructions of the U.S. importer and then shipped from origin. Forwarders and NVOs, 3PLs, we'll continue to call them, offer origin customs clearance services. Before we go any further, let's clarify this whole story around a CFS, Consolidated Freight Station. We'll present it as a supply chain perspective. But a CFS can be at origin, a CFS can be at destination. It just depends. Let's see what we have. One term that gets thrown around a lot in the field of global logistics is that of the container freight station, a CFS as it's called. Depending on the nature of an importer's operating model, the CFS can serve as a vital node in the inbound logistics chain. With that said, sometimes there is confusion around what a CF really is and what purpose it serves. Second paragraph. Within the context of a U.S. import model, a CFS is essentially a multi-door warehouse facility at origin that receives cargo from suppliers for subsequent consolidation into ocean containers. Container freight station, that's why it's called that. In most cases, a CFS is located in close proximity to the port of export at origin in order to reduce drayage costs from the CFS to the ocean terminal. Of course, the CFS gets stuffed with cargo. Well, that container has to be moved, has to be drayed from the CFS facility to the ocean terminal. It's part of that ecosystem, and we want that CFS to be relatively close to the port for timing purposes and for expense purposes. In Asia, a CFS is oftentimes built as a multi-story facility that bears a resemblance to a parking garage. And that's very true, whether one goes to China or Taiwan or other places. Typically in Asia, buildings aren't spread out as a one-story facility. They go up as 3, 4, 5, 6-story facilities, and really does bear a slight resemblance to a parking garage. The only difference is there aren't any cars in the parking garage. There's lots of trucks bringing cargo in and out. Last paragraph. A CFS can serve a number of purposes, including as a consolidation point for shipments coming from multiple vendors for the same U.S. importer. That's what buyer's consolidation is. More on that in a moment. As well as an LCL consolidation facility, less than container load. In either case, the emphasis is on the receipt and consolidation of shipments into containers, ocean containers, for shipment and subsequent deconsolidation at a destination CFS in the U.S. We consolidate at origin and we deconsolidate at destination. Deconsolidation is just that, opening up the ocean container and emptying it out and distributing the goods accordingly. That's how CFSs really work. Moving along with the Ocean Forwarder and NVOCC service offering, what else do we have? Well, they can arrange inland transportation or drayage to an origin port for full container load moves. Containers that are spotted at a supplier's factory, filled to the brim, and then drayed to the port. Forwarders will organize that. They'll also prepare bills of lading for FCL shipments. But changing gears a bit, they will offer less than container load ocean freight consolidation service, LCL. And, of course, pick up an inland freight associated with the origin needs for LCL cargo going into a consolidation facility, a CFS. Lots of services, as we see. The portfolio of services that a 3PL that operates as an ocean transport intermediary, freight forwarder, and NVOCC is quite extensive. That's why there's so many of them out in the global marketplace, because importers and exporters, for that matter, see a lot of value in what these companies do. They can provide cargo packing and crating services at origin. And when we talk about crating, that automatically means wood crating. Forwarders will do that. If they're properly certified, 3PLs can also offer hazardous materials packing and labeling. There are special certifications required for that. Port drayage for LCL cargo, and prepare ocean bills of lading for LCL shipments. We've spoken a little bit about the difference between buyer's consolidation and LCL cargo. We'll talk a lot about it in the next module, but let's straighten out the story a little bit with a real-world example. Buyer's consol versus LCL cargo. You are taking a class on global logistics, and the topic of discussion is that of global ocean transportation and different import operating models for the U.S. market. One student asked the professor a seemingly simple question. What is the difference between a buyer's consolidation model and standard LCL services? Predictably, the professor stumbles through an answer, and you raise your hand to help out. How might you explain this very big difference? And we say predictably because unless people have actually been in a CFS that offers buyer's consol versus LCL services, there's no way they're ever going to know what the difference really is. Second paragraph. The first point you might consider is that while there are big differences between buyer's consolidation and LCL, they are both based on the principle of freight consolidation. Taking cargo from multiple shippers and putting it into the same container. That's what freight consolidation is. The difference comes in that a buyer's consolidation model is based on the receipt and consolidation of cargo from multiple suppliers, but on behalf of the same U.S. importer. In other words, all cargo that goes into a buyer's consol box, as it's called, is for the same importer. As such, pricing is on an FCL basis. That's an important distinction. You could have cargo from 10 vendors going into the same container. As long as it's going to the same importer, the same consignee in the United States, that's an FCL load for purposes of dealing with the steamship line. Last paragraph. LCL, on the other hand, is a consolidation service for multiple shippers going to multiple BCOs in the U.S. Essentially, the U.S. importer is just renting space with a bunch of other people in the same container. Last sentence. With so many different shippers and consignees in a consol box, the ocean freight charges are assigned to each shipping party, but on a per cubic meter basis. We're only paying, as an importer, for the amount of space we take up in that container, measured as a CBM, a cubic meter. As you can see, that's different from buyer's consol. Both are based on the principle of consolidation, but buyer's consol and LCL are not the same thing. We will continue to elaborate on those differences in the upcoming module. That will wrap up this section. Now, when we come back, we'll get into full container load shipping. How does the pricing work? The pricing model, as it's sometimes referred to. We shall see you soon.